Thomas and Friends, The Sodor Chronicles, the movie. Part 1. The Race and the Accident. Thomas and Hero were sitting at Elsbridge Station, and Thomas was right beside Hero as he steamed in, but he was asking Hero for a race. Hero said, "A race, Thomas? You know I would win. Even though you are small, I am bigger." Well, said Thomas. "That may be true, but let's go." Thomas made it all the way up Gordon's Hill and went down the other side. Hero had trouble getting up because his wheels were newer. So that's when Hero came down the hill and had an accident. Since Hero just had an accident, that wasn't good. A very bad accident for things to happen. Very unfortunate. So that's when Hero was waiting for an engine to come and help him. But on the other side of the island, Thomas was at Knapford waiting for Hero. Since he was waiting for Hero, it was very, very boring that he had to wait for him. So that turned out that it was going to be harder to, wait for Gordon. So that's Thomas just waited there and waited there and waited there and waited there and waited there. So boring. Gordon finally arrived, but then that's when Edward had steamed into the yards to pull his coaches. Then he steamed off. Edward was on his journey along the line, and he was on his way up Gordon's Hill. As he was almost up Gordon's Hill, as he steamed up Gordon's Hill, the train started to come uncoupled. That wasn't a good thing. And the cart slid down the hill. So that's when Edward decided that he was going to need to back up on his way back to get the coaches. So I guess Edward was getting ready to puff back down onto his coach. horses, and he was getting ready to pull his train again, back to the yards. That's when Edward backed down onto the train. The driver needed to couple them back together, and they were on their way. And it steamed up slowly up Gordon's Hill. He was about to head down when he saw Hero. He had noticed Hero had been derailed. When Edward had steamed down the hill, like I said, he noticed Hero. Hero was sitting there. Edward was steaming down the hill. Edward said, "Hero, what happened?" "Oh, I came off the line coming down the hill." "Wow. That's an original." "I guess so, Edward." Could you mind helping me?" Yes, and Edward steamed along Thomas's branch line, / the windmill area. He steamed along. Duck told him to stop. Duck said, "Stop, Edward. You must not go any further. There's this huge engine on the line." And he said, "Oh, sure." But he backed away anyways to be careful. That's when Duck said, "Edward, I'm coming back. Just give me a minute." But still, while Edward waited for Duck to back up, Duck had finally reversed. And that's when Duck said to Edward, "Edward, you must always stay away from engines like her. She can always do the madness." "But how?" said Edward. Edward was still waiting for Duck to back up for the second time. But when Duck backed up, he was talking to Edward. Said, "Like I said, she can drive anyone to madness, because she's one screeching engine." "What do you mean," said Edward, "by screeching engine?" "Edward, I mean by screeching engine, evil engine." "Oh." "Oh," said Edward. "Yes," said Duck. "But honestly, do you honestly believe what I am saying?" "I guess I do." "Okay, that's good. So, the windmill was starting to slowly turn. Edward steamed off. So that's when he steamed around the bend. Said Edward Thomas said, "Maybe it is." Little engines always know that. Always know things are going to in the background. That's when Edward needed to start shunting his coaches into the yards. Since he was shunting his coaches into the yards, he had to wait a little bit before the shunter shunted to points, and he was able to. There we go. And then he shunted his coaches into the yard. He was getting ready to get the breakdown crane. That's when Edward was uncoupled, and he was getting ready to steam off. "Gordon, give me," said Thomas to Gordon. "Me and my ways. What do you mean, me and my ways?" "Oh, Thomas, you know. Oh, little Thomas, you know what I mean." "No, I don't," said Thomas. "Oh, sure you do," said Gordon. Edward steamed out of the yard real quick and peeped away and said, "Don't fight," as he steamed along. He was getting ready to get the breakdown crane. Well, that's when Thomas and Gordon kept arguing and fighting, and it got annoying after a while. As Edward arrived at the wreck of Hero, he had two things on his mind: getting Hero back onto the rails and getting Hero back to the Nafford station. And then the crane started to lift Hero. Bum 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 bum. Hero was finally back on the rails, thanks to Edward. He said, "Thank you, Edward, for getting me back on the rails." You're welcome, Hero. No doubt about it. Well, Edward, I gotta go now. See you later, Edward. Alright, Hero. I'll see you later. Edward steamed on to Nafford Station. Well, stopped right there in the middle of the yards to wait for the signal to go green. That's when Hero was on his way back. One day, Thomas was steaming down the branch line like a really useful engine. Being the really useful engine that he is, if I can get him to start. He was steaming down the branch line. Stopped at Farquhar Station. He arrived at Farquhar Station, which he was waiting for the signal to turn green. The signal hadn't turned green yet. The signal was still green. and Nelson was steaming by. Then Thomas was ready to set off. He ended up on his way back to the Aldalfa Quarry. Since he was heading to the Aldalfa Quarry, he had a lot more things to worry about. Then he steamed straight into the pile of dirt. And that's when Percy said, "I'll go and get help, Thomas." Toby was waiting to hear from his driver. His driver said, "Toby, I think we should leave now. Go get Thomas's passengers for him." Oh. Well, okay, let's go. And then Toby steamed off. He waited at Farquhar to get his own passengers, and then he steamed off to go get Thomas's. Luckily, he was able to go get his passengers to the mess until he steamed right into Percy's train. That didn't end well. As Toby steamed back to the platform to drop off his passengers back at Farquhar, he waited till Percy could get his train back onto the line. While Toby was waiting, Percy was shunting his cars into the freaking yards. He said, "Why should I be shunting cars when they're the ones who won't behave?" And Percy had shunted the first two cars into place. Now he said, "Time to go get the rest of them." Yay. And that's when Percy set off. Percy was still steaming into the yard, shunting his freight cars. He wasn't too happy with shunting his freight cars due to the fact Thomas was off the line. "I need to go get Thomas," said Percy, as he steamed away. Toby said, "Percy, move so I can take the rest of Thomas's passengers." Oh, okay. He steamed into the siding, and Toby set off. Right into the mess of rocks. While Toby had taken his train back to the yards, Percy had to shunt Annie and Clarabelle into the sidings. Percy had shunted them into place. He steamed back to the yards to go fetch Thomas. "Why do I have to go save Thomas? He could have saved himself by now," steamed Percy. Annie said, "Oh no, he's going to go save Thomas? Well, great." A certain friend had came to help Thomas, and while Thomas was stuck off the line. As Percy steamed his hardest, Thomas was reversing. Percy wasn't so happy to take Thomas back to Farquhar.
But while at the off the quarry, while Percy was with Thomas at Farquhar. He left Thomas at Farquhar. Thomas was getting ready to steam right back onto his train. Oh, go inside and get my freight cars, please. I just thought about it. I'm gonna need them.
Okay.
As Thomas had steamed right back in to the station to go get his coaches, he noticed one thing. When he had his coaches, should I be able to take my passengers today? I should, shouldn't I? First he steamed by. Hey, Tom. It's a wonderful day, isn't it? Don't you think? Yes, Percy, but I need to steam along. I'm sorry, Percy. I gotta go. That's when he steamed along. Steaming along. That's when Terrence had crossed the line. Percy was wondering why Thomas didn't listen to him when he needed help with his train. But on down the line, he was waiting there for them to clean up a mess. Until he said instead, I'm just gonna head back to Farquhar. I told you to listen to me, Thomas. What do you mean by listen to you? When I said to wait, you never listened. Oh. Well. I'll just leave my train and I'll go and finish my run. Thomas was getting ready to be sent along the branch line for his evening run while Percy was shunting freight cars to the yard. Thomas was getting ready to go. Peyton, you gotta move your hand. As Thomas was getting ready to go, he didn't completely come off the line, but he was supposed to. And he came off the line. When he did come off the line, he went straight into the road. Not Trevor. Terrence was coming by to go home, and he couldn't get through because Thomas was off the line. As you probably could expect, Percy was shunting some coaches to the yards. Not coaches, freight cars. and one freight car got stuck on the windmill. As he was still shunting them, he had an accident along the road. Thomas was off the line in search for help from Percy. Percy hadn't came back yet from the accident. Push the back of Percy. Off the back of Percy, like I mean. Percy was on his way, pulling the train of heavy stone in the Farquhar. He had stopped just in time with the rest of Toby's train. That's when he decided, now I'm gonna have to go and take this back to the Aldafa quarry. As he was on his way back, his driver left Henrietta and Victoria back at the station. But on Percy's way to the Aldafa quarry, he had the same accident Thomas did earlier that day. The cars just kept pushing and pushing, and Percy ended up landing in the soil. Percy landed silently in the dirt. He wasn't too happy because, well, think about it. Would you be happy when you had an accident? No, you wouldn't. You'd be very upset. So Percy was stuck there. So when Percy couldn't help Thomas, someone else had to go help Thomas. Trucks helping on Thomas's branch line helped him back onto the line. That's when Thomas was on his way back to the yards, and he steamed off. Had stopped, he noticed that Percy was still back there, and he had to go back and help. That's when Thomas said, "Oh no, I must go help Percy." He went over the crossing, over past the signal, and back towards the tunnel. He waited for the points to be switched and set off towards Farquhar. He was getting close to Farquhar when he shunted Victoria and Henrietta on. Thomas had arrived at Percy's train. Percy said, "Come on, Thomas, help already." "All right." He shunted up close to the... Thomas was shunting the rest of Percy's train onto a different siding. He coupled up to Percy. Bum, bum, bum. Bum 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 bum. As Percy was back onto the line, he thanked Thomas for getting him back onto the line. Thank you, Thomas, for getting me back onto the line. No problem, Percy. That's when Percy said to himself, I should definitely get back to work, while Thomas was steaming back into Farquhar. Percy said, I'll steam back to work. And Percy was on his way back to work. Percy was waiting for Thomas to go back to Farquhar. So that's when Thomas said, I'll go back to Farquhar, Percy. And he steamed on his way back to Farquhar. Alright. Thomas was on his way back to Farquhar. And instead Thomas was steaming on his way back to Farquhar. Thomas was stopped at Farquhar, waiting to take on his last train of the day. Yo, you're messing it up. Quit. Thomas was steaming along, and he wasn't going to go on that track anymore. He was on his way to the Farquhar Quarry. Toby was saying to Thomas, Hey Thomas, go ahead and steam off to go get your train ready. If you go ahead and get ready for your train, I'll bring it to you. Clarabelle said, How nice of you, Toby, to take us to Thomas. Oh, it's the least I could do after all the accidents that have happened today. This branch line's not very useful after all. Toby brought Thomas's passengers. Thomas said thank you to Toby and was on his way. He's a really useful engine, you know, and all the other engines on this branch line will tell you so. He huffs and puffs and whistles, rushing to and fro. He's the really useful engine we adore.